My daughter ignored me for 20 years until I won $10 million. Then she invited me to her birthday party, hoping for generosity from the father she had disowned. But I had a plan to get revenge for her betrayal. When I arrived, I said, "Your present is outside," and turned her party into a nightmare. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. The sharp, insistent trill of the phone sliced through the evening calm like a blade through silk. I froze, fork halfway to my mouth, watching the gravy congeal on my meatloaf as the sound echoed through my modest kitchen. The news anchor droned on about another factory closure downtown, but all I could hear was that relentless ringing. 24 hours had passed since my television interview aired. 24 hours since I'd told the local news about winning $10 million in the state lottery. The reporter had asked about family, and I'd simply said I was alone since my wife Anne died 15 years ago. What I hadn't mentioned was the daughter who'd walked out of my life 2 decades earlier. My weathered hand trembled as I reached for the receiver. The number on the caller ID meant nothing to me, but something deep in my chest twisted with an emotion I couldn't name. "Hello." My voice came out rougher than intended. A pause, then soft as silk and twice as dangerous. "Hi, Daddy. It's me, Lori." The fork slipped from my fingers and clattered against the plate. 20 years of silence shattered with those 4 words. Her voice carried the same musical quality I remembered from childhood, but underneath lurked something calculated, rehearsed. Lori. The name escaped as barely a whisper, disbelief making my throat tight. "I know it's been a long time." She paused again, the hesitation so perfectly timed, it felt practiced. "I saw you on the news yesterday. Congratulations on your win." There it was, the reason for this sudden resurrection of our relationship. I gripped the receiver until my knuckles went white, legs suddenly too weak to support my weight. I sank into the kitchen chair, staring at the rain streaking down the window. 20 years, I said, the words falling flat and emotionless into the space between us. I've been thinking about calling for so long, but I was scared. Ashamed, I suppose, but seeing you on television, hearing that you're doing well. Her voice caught just slightly, a masterful touch of vulnerability. It made me realize how much I've missed you. My free hand found the edge of the table, gripping it like an anchor. The coffee in my mug had gone cold hours ago, bitter and forgotten. Outside, the March evening had turned darker, matching the storm brewing in my chest. "I want to invite you to my 40th birthday party," she continued when I didn't respond. "It's on April 7th. I'd really love to see you, Daddy, to try to make things right between us." 40 years old. My little girl was 40, and I'd missed half her life because of pride and hurt feelings. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked away the seconds as I struggled to process this moment I dreamed about for 2 decades. "Your birthday?" I managed, confusion mixing with the faint stirring of hope I tried to suppress. "Yes, I live in Manhattan now. I'll text you the address after we hang up. Please say you'll come. Please." The desperation in that last word felt genuine. But 20 years of abandonment had taught me to be wary of my own wishful thinking. Still, she was my daughter, my only child. The baby girl Anne and I had rocked to sleep. The toddler who'd called me her hero. The teenager who'd been so bright and ambitious. I'll be there," I heard myself say, surprising us both. "Really? Oh, Daddy, that's wonderful." I can't wait to see you. We have so much to catch up on." After she hung up, I sat motionless in my kitchen, still gripping the receiver. The notepad beside the phone displayed her Manhattan address in my shaky handwriting. 47 characters that might as well have been coordinates to another planet. The news had moved on to weather reports promising warmer days ahead, but I barely heard it over the thundering of my heart and the whisper of old wounds beginning to ache. I stood slowly, my joints protesting after the day's work, and walked toward the stairs. The piece of paper with her address stayed clutched in my hand as I climbed toward my bedroom, my mind reeling with questions I wasn't ready to answer. Sleep eluded me entirely. The address burned like a coal in my palm as I lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling where streetlight shadows danced through the blinds. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, not as the 40-year-old woman who'd called tonight, but as the angry 20-year-old who'd walked out of this very house. At midnight, I gave up trying. The floorboards creaked under my feet as I made my way to the living room, where cardboard boxes of photographs waited in the corner like sleeping memories. I hadn't looked through these in years, but tonight felt like the right time to torture myself. The first photo stopped me cold. Laurie at her college graduation, radiant in her cap and gown, standing between Anne and me. We'd been so proud that day. Our daughter, the first in either family to earn a degree, ready to conquer the world with her business ambitions. That was 3 months before Anne died. 3 months before everything fell apart. The memory hit me like a physical blow, dragging me back to that terrible day in 2005. The funeral had been small. We couldn't afford much more. I was drowning in medical bills from Anne's cancer treatments, working double shifts at the factory just to keep our heads above water. Laurie had returned from New York for the service, dressed in an expensive black suit that probably cost more than I made in a month. "Where's the money Mom left me?" she demanded the next morning, standing in this same living room with her designer suitcase already packed. My hands shook as I touched the photograph. The conversation played in my memory with crystal clarity. Every cruel word etched into my soul. "Honey, there is no money. The medical bills took everything we had, more than we had." Her face had twisted with disgust, disappointment turning quickly to anger. "You're pathetic. A factory worker who couldn't even save his wife." "Your mother loved you," I'd pleaded, desperate to reach the daughter I thought I knew. "This isn't what she'd want." But Laurie had already moved beyond hearing me. Her eyes swept across our modest home, the worn furniture, the patches in the wallpaper, the evidence of a life lived paycheck to paycheck, and found it all lacking. "I don't need a poor father like you," she'd said with the casual cruelty that only comes from youth and disappointment. "I'll make my own fortune. I'll have the life you could never give me." "Laurie, please." The word had come out broken, desperate. She had paused at the door, her hand on the knob, and delivered the final blow without even turning around. "Don't call me. Don't write. I'm done with this life." The front door had slammed behind her, and I hadn't heard her voice again until tonight. 2 in the morning. Found me surrounded by scattered photographs on the coffee table. Images of happier times when we'd been a family. Laurie as a baby, taking her first steps in this very room. Birthday parties with homemade cakes. Christmas mornings when we'd had little money but plenty of love. The house settled around me with familiar creaks and sighs. Through the thin walls, I could hear Mrs. Patterson's television next door, some late-night movie keeping her company in her own loneliness. The radiator clanked to life, fighting off the March chill that seemed to seep through the old windows. I picked up another photo. Laurie at 16 rolling her eyes at something I'd said, but smiling despite herself. When had we lost that easy affection? When had my ambitious daughter decided that love wasn't worth having if it came from poor hands. The streetlight outside painted everything in harsh shadows, making the past feel even more distant. My fingers traced the edge of the photograph, remembering the weight of her small hand in mine when she was little, the way she'd run to me when she scraped her knee, how she'd called me the strongest man in the world. A car drove by outside, its headlights sweeping across the room before disappearing into the night. I gathered the photos into a neat pile, but kept that graduation picture on top. We'd been so happy that day, so full of dreams for her future. I'd imagined being at her wedding someday, holding grandchildren, watching her build the successful life she'd always wanted. Instead, I'd gotten 20 years up. 20 years of silence and a phone call that came exactly one day after my lottery numbers hit the evening news. Dawn was breaking through the kitchen window when I finally abandoned the living room, leaving the photographs scattered like pieces of a broken puzzle. The morning light revealed the exhaustion etched in my reflection on the window glass, an old man who'd spent the night wrestling with ghosts. I walked slowly toward the kitchen, my joints stiff from the cold and the long night of sitting on the floor. The coffee maker sat waiting on the counter, ready for another day's routine, but my mind was still churning with questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. The coffee maker gurgled to life as steam rose from my mug like the ghost of better times. April 1st had arrived with clear skies and the promise of spring, but I felt winter in my bones. My reflection in the kitchen window showed a man who'd aged a decade overnight. Stubble, wrinkled clothes, eyes red from sleeplessness. The steam reminded me of another kind of shock, one that had come exactly 1 month ago, March 1st, when I had sat at this same table, checking my lottery numbers over breakfast, the ticket trembling in my hand as I matched each digit twice, then 3 times. Gender 14, 23, 31, 42. The Powerball 18. I'd stared at those numbers until they blurred, certain my tired eyes were playing tricks. At 65, hope becomes a dangerous luxury, but the numbers stayed the same, stubborn as my disbelief. The drive to Chicago that Saturday had been the longest 3 hours of my life. My hands shook so badly I'd pulled over twice to collect myself, the winning ticket tucked in my wallet like a secret too big for my chest to contain. The lottery office in downtown Chicago looked like any other government building. Gray official, intimidating. "Sir, congratulations. You've won $10 million. The official's words had echoed in the sterile room as I gripped the arms of my chair. After taxes, $6 to $2 million. More money than I'd see in 10 lifetimes of factory work. Life-changing money. But for what life? Are you certain? I'd asked, my voice cracking like a teenager's. Yes, sir. We verified the ticket 3 times. The paperwork had taken hours. Bank accounts, tax forms, legal documents that made my head spin. Through it all, one question kept echoing in my mind. Who would I tell? Anne was gone. My few friends from the factory were scattered to retirement communities and assisted living. My daughter, who would you like to notify first? The bank manager had asked as we set up the account. No one, not yet. This needs to stay quiet. For weeks, I'd carried the secret alone. The money sat in the bank like a sleeping giant while I went about my normal routine. Grocery shopping, television, the occasional visit to the library. I bought a new winter coat and immediately felt guilty about the expense, even though I could afford 1,000 coats now. Then came yesterday's interview. The local news had somehow gotten wind of my win public records, probably, and wanted to do a human interest story about the lucky retiree from Detroit. I'd agreed, thinking it might be nice to have 5 minutes of fame at my age. "What will you do with the money, Mr. Green?" the young reporter had asked, her camera crew crowding my small living room. "Help some local charities, I suppose. Maybe fix up the house a bit. I've been alone since my wife passed 15 years ago, so I don't need much." I'd mentioned being alone deliberately, carefully. If Laurie ever saw the interview, she'd know her father was wealthy and lonely. A perfect combination for someone who'd cut ties over money. The coffee burned my tongue as I took a sip, but I barely noticed. The timeline was too perfect to be coincidence. Interview aired Monday evening. Daughter called Tuesday evening. 20 years of silence broken exactly 24 hours after she learned about my fortune. I set the mug down harder than necessary, the sound sharp in the morning quiet. Outside, my neighbor, Mr. Johnson, was already tending his garden, getting ready for spring planting. Normal people doing normal things while I wrestled with the possibility that my only child saw me as nothing more than a lottery ticket. The phone on the counter seemed to mock me with its silence. I could call her back, test her somehow, see if her sudden affection had any foundation beyond my bank balance. The smart thing would be to protect myself, to assume the worst about her motives. But she was still my daughter, the little girl who'd sat on my shoulders at the county fair, who'd made me Father's Day cards with construction paper and glue. Even after 20 years of abandonment, part of me wanted to believe she'd had a change of heart, that seeing me on television had reminded her of the father she'd once loved. The kitchen clock ticked toward 8 o'clock. Rush hour traffic hummed in the distance as Detroit woke up around me. I walked to the window and stared out at the street where I'd lived for 40 years, watching the world move forward while I stood still. My reflection stared back from the glass. An old man holding a coffee mug, surrounded by the modest life my daughter had found so shameful. But now I had something she wanted. Now I had power. The realization settled over me slowly, like dust on an unused shelf. For the first time in 20 years, I held the cards in whatever game we were about to play. The question was whether I had the courage to deal them. I reached for the phone, my finger hovering over the buttons. Her number was still fresh in my memory from last night's caller ID. Just a simple test call to hear her voice again, to probe gently at her motives. The morning light streamed through the window, illuminating the determination that had begun to grow in my tired eyes. The steam rising from my coffee cup reminded me of something else. The blazing studio lights from 2 days ago. March 30th, the day that changed everything, though I hadn't realized it at the time. WDIV's downtown Detroit studio had felt like stepping into another world. Chrome and glass everywhere, cables snaking across polished floors, monitors displaying my nervous face from 6 different angles. I'd arrived an hour early, clutching the lottery ticket in my sweaty palm, wearing my best light blue shirt, the one Anne had bought me for church years ago. "Mr. Green, I'm Janet Morrison. Thanks for coming in today." The news anchor's smile was practiced perfection, her makeup flawless under the harsh lighting. Behind her, a camera operator adjusted his equipment while a studio assistant fussed with reflectors, everyone moving with choreographed precision. They'd led me to makeup first, a humbling experience for a man who'd never worn anything but aftershave. The young woman dabbing powder on my forehead chatted about the weather while I stared at my reflection, wondering what Anne would think of her husband becoming a local celebrity. "Just be yourself," Janet had advised as we settled into the interview chairs. "Our viewers love authentic stories." Authentic? If only she knew how carefully I planned to edit mine. The red recording light blinked on, and suddenly I was performing for thousands of strangers. Janet's questions came smoothly, professionally crafted to extract maximum human interest from my unexpected fortune. $10 million. That's life-changing money, Mr. Green. What are your plans? I'd practice this answer. Help local charities. Detroit's been good to me for 40 years. Time to give back. Any family to share this incredible joy with? Here came the moment I dreaded and anticipated. The careful emission that might reach the right ears in Manhattan. My wife passed away 15 years ago. I live alone now. The studio fell quiet, except for the hum of air conditioning. Janet's expression softened with genuine sympathy, the kind that made good television. No children, she pressed gently. I paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough to suggest complicated history. That's complicated. Janet nodded knowingly, professional enough not to probe deeper into personal pain. Instead, she steered towards safer territory, my plans for the money. My advice for other lottery players, my thoughts on sudden wealth. But the damage was done. Or perhaps the invitation was sent. A wealthy widower hour alone in Detroit, sitting on millions of dollars with no family to protect him or share his good fortune. Exactly the kind of target my daughter had always preferred. The photo session afterward felt surreal, holding an oversized check while cameras flashed, grinning on command. While inside, I wondered if anyone watching truly cared about my happiness or just my bank balance. The lottery officials posed beside me, everyone smiling like we were old friends instead of strangers connected by random numbers and lucky timing. Driving home in my 15-year-old pickup truck, the lottery ticket safely tucked back in my wallet, I'd felt oddly empty. Success without someone to share it with was just an expensive form of loneliness. The studio assistant had handed me a business card as I left. Mr. Green, you'll probably get some calls after this airs. People wanting money, investment opportunities, that sort of thing. Be careful who you trust. Sound advice. I should have heeded more seriously. Now sitting in my kitchen 48 hours later, I realized that broadcast had been more than just local news. It had been a beacon, a signal flare sent up into the darkness where my daughter lived her ambitious life. And like a moth drawn to flame, she'd come circling back the very next evening. I set down my coffee cup and reached for the phone, finally understanding the game we were about to play. My finger hovered over the final digit of her number, the morning sun streaming through the kitchen window like a spotlight on this moment of truth. Everything hinged on the next few minutes. 20 years of questions about to be answered with surgical precision. The dial tone seemed to ring forever before her voice answered, honey sweet and calculated. Hi, Daddy. I was hoping you'd call back. Already the performance had begun. I pulled out a notepad and pen, ready to document every nuance of her responses. Hi, Laurie. We need to talk about that television interview. A pause, barely perceptible, but I caught it. The momentary hesitation of someone preparing their defense. Oh, what about it, Daddy? The endearment felt rehearsed, like dialogue from a play she'd been practicing. I gripped the pen tighter and began my test. There's been a mistake. The TV station got their facts wrong. What kind of mistake? Her voice carried a new edge, sharper than the false sweetness. I didn't really win $10 million. It was an administrative error at the lottery office. They're issuing a correction today. The silence that followed lasted exactly 4 seconds. I counted them. watching the kitchen clock tick away her true nature. Then why am I wasting my time with this conversation? There it was, the real Laurie Steele, stripped of pretense and revealed in all her calculating glory. No concern for my disappointment, no sympathy for the embarrassment of a public correction, just cold fury at having her time wasted on a poor father. Excuse me. I kept my voice level, though my heart hammered against my ribs. She caught herself immediately, the mask sliding back into place with practiced ease. I mean, oh, Daddy, that's so disappointing. You must be devastated. I'm sorry this happened to you, but the recovery came too late. I'd heard her true voice, the one that had walked out of this house 20 years ago. 2 years ago, and never looked back. Actually, Laurie, I was testing you. I let the words fall like stones into still water. The money is real, all of it. Another pause, this one filled with calculation. When she spoke again, the artificial warmth was cranked up to maximum volume, overcompensating for her earlier slip. Oh, Daddy, you scared me. I'm just so happy for you. $10 million, can you imagine? We'll have so much fun at my birthday party. I can't wait to celebrate your good fortune. We as if she'd been part of my life when the ticket was purchased, when the numbers were drawn, when I'd sat alone in this kitchen with no one to share the moment that changed everything. I scribbled notes furiously, capturing her exact words. Wasting my time, followed immediately by, "So happy for you." The transformation was so complete, it would have been impressive if it weren't so heartbreaking. The party's still on April 7th? I asked, already knowing the answer. Absolutely. I've been planning something special. Just thinking about introducing you to my friends, showing off my successful father. Her voice trailed off, in what I supposed was meant to sound like happy emotion. After we hung up, I stared at my notes for a long time. The evidence was there in black and white, her immediate coldness when the money disappeared, her instant warmth when it returned. 20 years of wondering about her true feelings, and now I had mathematical proof of exactly where I stood in her priorities. The coffee had gone cold while I conducted my experiment, but I barely noticed. Something fundamental had shifted in the landscape of my heart. The father, who'd spent 2 decades hoping for reconciliation, was gone, replaced by someone harder, more strategic. I walked slowly from the kitchen to the living room, carrying the notepad like a piece of crucial evidence, which I supposed it was. Evening settled over Detroit like a blanket, the golden hour light filtering through my living room windows as I sat in Anne's favorite chair. Her photograph rested on the side table, showing the woman who'd been my moral compass for 30 years of marriage. The hours between that morning's phone call and this moment of reckoning had passed in a blur of mundane activities, washing dishes, folding laundry, watering the small garden Anne had planted behind the house. But my mind kept returning to Laurie's voice, the way it had shifted from warm to cold and back again, like a radio dial being turned. Anne, what would you say about this? I asked her picture, touching the glass over her smiling face. She'd always believed in consequences, my wife. Not cruel punishment, but natural results that taught real lessons. When Laurie was 12 and stole candy from the corner store, Anne had marched her back to apologize and work off the debt. When she'd lied about her grades in high school, Anne had removed her driving privileges until honesty returned. Actions have consequences, she used to say. Love sometimes requires difficult lessons. 20 years. I'd spent 20 years Years making excuses for my daughter's silence, convincing myself she'd call when she was ready, that family bonds would eventually overcome whatever had driven us apart. But today's test had shown me the truth. There was no family bond, just a bank account. She'd finally noticed the notebook lay open on my lap, her cruel words staring back at me. Why am I wasting my time with this? 5 minutes into learning her father might be poor again, and she'd already written him off. 5 minutes to reveal what 20 years of silence had really meant. I couldn't hear Anne's actual voice anymore. 15 years had dulled even my sharpest memories, but I could imagine what she'd tell me. That love without boundaries wasn't love at all, just enabling. That a grown woman who'd chosen greed over family needed to learn what that choice really cost. The neighborhood outside my window buzzed with life. Mr. Johnson trimmed his hedge while his grandchildren played in the yard. Mrs. Patterson walked her ancient cocker spaniel past my fence, stopping to wave when she saw me in the window. Normal families living normal lives, taking their connections for granted in the way I'd once dreamed of doing. But I'd been given a different path. My only child had chosen to see me as either a piggyback or an embarrassment, nothing in between. Well, if she wanted to treat our relationship as a transaction, perhaps it was time to show her what a real transaction looked like. I opened my notebook to a fresh page and began writing. Not poetry or sentiment, but strategy. Laurie had mentioned business ventures over the years in her rare communications. Startups, investors, the kind of ambitious projects that required significant capital. If she was calling me now, desperate enough to resurrect a dead relationship, then something had gone wrong with her golden plans. The pen felt heavy in my hand as I wrote the first words of what would become my daughter's education. Research Laurie's current business situation. Find leverage. Design appropriate consequences. Not destruction. Anne would never approve of that. But justice. A lesson in the real cost of treating family like expendable assets. 20 years of silence had taught me patience. Now it was time to teach her something in return. Outside, the streetlights began flickering on as Detroit settled into another night. I stood slowly from Anne's chair, my joints protesting the long set, and walked toward the spare bedroom where my old computer waited in hibernation. Laurie wanted to play games with family loyalty and money. Fine. But after 40 years of marriage to a wise woman and 20 years of lonely reflection, I'd learned a thing or two about both. The old computer hummed to life in my spare bedroom, its fan whirring like a tired engine as the monitor flickered awake. April 3rd had arrived gray and cold, matching my mood as I settled into the creaky office chair with my first cup of coffee. Sleep had eluded me again. Too many questions churning in my mind about exactly what kind of business my daughter had been conducting in New York. I'd spent yesterday organizing the sparse information I had, writing down everything I remembered from our conversation. Business ventures, she'd mentioned investors, the kind of ambitious projects that required significant capital and delivered impressive promises. If she was calling me now, desperate enough to resurrect a 20-year silence, then something had gone seriously wrong with those golden plans. The internet connection crawled at the speed of old phone lines, but I had patience. 65 years of life had taught me that the most important discoveries couldn't be rushed. Laurie Steele business, I typed into the search box, feeling like an archaeological expedition leader dusting off ancient artifacts. The first results painted a picture of success. Professional headshot on LinkedIn mentions in entrepreneurship articles quotes about innovation and sustainable business practices. My daughter had certainly learned to market herself well, but something felt rehearsed about it all, too polished, like a resume written by someone desperate to hide gaps in employment. I clicked deeper, adding terms like startup and funding to my searches. The cheerful professional facade began showing cracks. Page 3 of Google results revealed the first red flag. Green Tech Solutions under investigation for misuse of investor funds. My coffee went cold as I read. Green Tech Solutions, founded 2018. Solar panel installation startup. $500,000 raised from private investors. Company dissolved 2019 after funds disappeared and promised installations never materialized. CEO Lori Steele. The old printer wheezed as it spat out the article. Ink already running low. I'd need more cartridges if this investigation continued much longer. Urban Fresh Markets. Lori Steele. I typed next following threads that connected like a spider web of deception. Another startup, another group of investors. $300,000 vanished in 2021 after promises of organic food delivery services that never launched. Same pattern, big promises, enthusiastic fundraising, mysterious disappearance of capital. By noon, I'd discovered Tech Bridge Consulting, her most recent venture from 2022, business advisory services for small companies. $400,000 missing. Multiple complaints filed with the Better Business Bureau. 3 investors specifically named in an ongoing lawsuit. Alex Rivers, Sarah King, and Mike Thorne. I wrote their names carefully in my notebook, my handwriting steadier than it had been in days. These weren't just business failures, they were systematic theft. My daughter hadn't just abandoned her family. She'd become a predator who fed on other people's dreams and retirement savings. LinkedIn profiles gave me faces to match the names. Alex Rivers, 50-year-old venture capitalist from San Francisco. His bio mentioning lessons learned from failed investments. Sarah King, corporate lawyer from Chicago, her profile emphasizing justice for small business fraud victims. Mike Thorne, entrepreneur from Denver, whose recent posts suggested someone still burning with anger over financial betrayal. The sun had set outside my window before I found their contact information. Business addresses, phone numbers, email addresses, all publicly available through their professional networks. Modern technology made finding people remarkably simple, even for someone whose computer skills had been learned late in life. At 2:00 in the morning, I closed the laptop and stared at 3 manila folders spread across my desk. Each contained printed articles, contact information, and detailed timelines of my daughter's systematic deception. The evidence was overwhelming, damning, and heartbreakingly clear. I gathered the folders and walked slowly toward my bedroom, my joints protesting the long hours hunched over the computer screen. Instead of lying down, I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the first folder again, studying Alex Rivers' photograph in the dim light from the hallway. These people deserved to know where their money had gone. Saturday morning arrived with steady rain drumming against the windows, the perfect weather for indoor scheming. I'd spent Friday organizing my research, calling the business numbers to verify they were still active, and drafting letters by hand until the wording felt exactly right. Today was execution day. The computer screen glowed as I created a new email account. Concerned Citizen, Detroit Gmail, calm, anonymous but believable. The kind of address someone might use when sharing sensitive information about criminal activity. My fingers moved slowly across the keyboard. Decades of hunt and peck typing serving me well in this moment of digital revenge. The first email went to Alex Rivers in San Francisco. Dear Mr. Rivers, I have information regarding Lori Steele's current whereabouts and activities. She will be hosting a birthday party at 847 East 73rd Street, apartment 12B, Manhattan, on April 7th at 8:00 p.m. This may be your opportunity to serve legal papers or collect what she owes. I understand you lost $200,000 to her TechBridge consulting fraud. Multiple other investors will likely be interested in this information. A concerned party who believes in justice. I attached copies of the news articles I'd printed, creating a digital evidence package that would leave no doubt about Lore's pattern of behavior. My hand hesitated over the mouse button for exactly 3 seconds, the last moment when this could still be reversed, when I could choose forgiveness over justice. But then I remembered her voice on the phone. Why am I wasting my time with this? Click Send. Sarah King's email followed 30 minutes later, crafted to appeal to her legal mindset. Miss King, as a fellow advocate for justice, I'm writing to inform you that Lori Steele will be at the following address on April 7th, 8 p.m., 847 East 73rd Street, apartment 12B, Manhattan. Given your losses in the TechBridge consulting matter, you may wish to coordinate with other affected investors. Documentation attached. Someone who believes criminals should face consequences. The third email to Mike Thorne required a different approach. His LinkedIn posts suggested someone who took business betrayal personally, who understood the human cost of financial fraud. Mr. Thorne, Lori Steele destroyed your trust and stole your money. She's doing the same to others, including trying to manipulate her elderly father. She'll be celebrating her 40th birthday at 847 East 73rd Street, apartment 12B, Manhattan, on April 7th at 8 p.m. Time to collect what she owes. A father who's tired of his daughter's lies. Each email carried 20 years of accumulated disappointment, transformed into precise coordinates for justice. I'd given them her exact location, the perfect timing, and documented proof of her criminal pattern. What they did with that information was up to them, but I'd provided every tool they needed to confront the woman who'd stolen their futures. The rain continued against the windows as I reviewed each message one final time. No threats, nothing that could be construed as encouraging violence, just information sharing between people who'd been wronged by the same criminal. Perfectly legal, completely justified, and devastatingly effective. I closed the laptop and walked to the kitchen for lunch, checking my watch out of habit. 48 hours until Lore's party. 48 hours for these emails to reach their destinations, and for 3 very angry investors to make their plans. The phone rang as I buttered my sandwich. Unknown number from San Francisco. I let it go to voicemail, smiling slightly as I heard Alex Rivers' excited voice thanking an anonymous tipster for information that might finally bring justice to a case that had consumed 2 years of his life. The second call came from Chicago 10 minutes later. Sarah King's legal training was evident in her carefully worded message, but underneath the professional language was the sharp satisfaction of someone who'd been waiting for exactly this kind of break. By evening, I'd received confirmation that all 3 emails had been opened and read. My anonymous account showed replies requesting additional details, which I provided with methodical precision. Phone numbers, social media profiles, background on the party attendees, everything they'd need to coordinate their approach. 20 years of silence ended with 3 emails and a few attached documents. My daughter had taught me that family meant nothing without money, that love was secondary to financial advantage. Now she was about to learn what happened when that philosophy met people who had nothing left to lose. I powered down the computer and walked to the living room, settling into Anne's chair with a cup of tea. 2 days until the party. 2 days until Laurie discovered that actions, even 20-year-old actions, eventually demand payment. Manhattan glittered around me like a jewelry box as my taxi wound through the Upper East Side. 6 hours of highway driving from Detroit, finally behind me. The modest hotel near Times Square had served its purpose, a place to shower, change clothes, and steel my nerves for what was about to unfold. Now, at 7:30 on April 7th, I carried a small wrapped box toward my daughter's apartment building, playing the role of proud father one last time. The doorman barely glanced at me as I gave Laurie's name. Just another elderly relative arriving for a birthday celebration. The elevator carried me smoothly to the 12th floor, its polished brass fixtures reflecting a man who looked calmer than he felt. My watch showed exactly 7:30. Perfect timing. "Daddy, you made it." Laura's voice rang through the hallway as she opened the door, her arms stretching wide for a theatrical hug that felt as rehearsed as everything else about our renewed relationship. Her apartment sparkled with expensive taste and hidden desperation. Crystal champagne flutes caught the light from carefully arranged candles, while a jazz quartet played softly in the corner. 25 guests mingled in designer clothes, their conversations floating between stock prices and vacation destinations. But my eyes caught details others missed. Overdue bills stacked on the kitchen counter, slightly worn spots on the Persian rugs, the subtle signs of someone living beyond increasingly limited means. "Everyone, meet my father, the lottery millionaire," she announced, steering me toward a cluster of impressed faces. The guests circled like well-dressed sharks, their interest in my presence suddenly sharpening. I smiled and nodded through introductions, playing the role of naive windfall recipient while internally counting minutes until 8 o'clock. "Tell us about your incredible win," demanded a woman whose jewelry probably costs more than my annual pension. "Later, perhaps." "Tonight belongs to Laurie," I deflected, raising my champagne glass toward my daughter. "Such a devoted father," the woman gushed to Laurie. "You're so lucky to have family support." "Yes, he's recently become very supportive," Laurie replied, shooting me a meaningful look that spoke volumes about her expectations for this evening. I wandered through the party, observing the careful choreography of social climbing and networking. These people weren't here for Laura's birthday. They were here for proximity to my money. The conversations followed predictable patterns. Compliments about her business acumen, leading questions about investment opportunities, subtle inquiries about my financial planning. Laurie orchestrated it all with practice skill, gradually steering discussions toward her need for business partners and strategic investors. Each hint grew bolder as the evening progressed, her desperation bleeding through the elegant facade like ink through expensive paper. "Daddy's been so generous with his advice," she told a small group near the window. "We're exploring some exciting opportunities together." I checked my watch. 7:55. Any moment now. The apartment felt smaller suddenly, the conversations louder, the jazz quartet's music unable to mask the underlying tension that only I could sense. Laurie moved through her guests with increasing energy, introducing me repeatedly as her successful father, while dropping broader hints about needing investment capital for her next venture. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan spread out below us like a circuit board of ambition and greed. Somewhere in this city, 3 people I'd never met were making their final preparations for a confrontation years in the making. Alex Rivers, Sarah King, and Mike Thorne, investors who trusted my daughter with their dreams and watched her transform those dreams into expensive champagne and designer dresses. The secret to success, Laurie was saying to a captivated audience, is recognizing opportunity when it presents itself. Sometimes fortune literally calls you on the phone. She glanced at me while speaking, her smile brilliant and predatory. The woman who'd abandoned her father for 20 years or so, 20 years now, saw him as the solution to all her financial problems. The irony was so perfect, it almost made me laugh. 7:58. I moved closer to the entrance, positioning myself where I could watch both the door and Laurie's face when her past finally caught up with her present. 800 arrived with the sharp sound of the doorbell cutting through jazz music and champagne-fueled conversation. Laurie paused mid-sentence in her pitch to a potential investor, her champagne glass freezing halfway to her lip. I'll get it," she called brightly, but I caught the slight furrow in her brow, the look of someone who wasn't expecting additional guests. As she walked toward the door, heels clicking confidently on marble floors, I took a sip of champagne and savored the moment. 20 years of questions were about to be answered. 20 years of silence were about to end with considerably more noise than either of us had anticipated. The doorbell's sharp sound cut through the party chatter like a blade through silk, but Laurie barely paused in her pitch to the distinguished gentleman beside me. She'd been building momentum for the past 10 minutes, weaving tales of investment opportunities that required strategic partnerships with experienced financial advisors. "Actually, Dad, since you're here," she turned toward me with that practiced smile, abandoning her previous conversation mid-sentence. "I could really use your help with some exciting business ventures I've been developing." There it was, the moment I'd been expecting since stepping into her apartment. 20 years of silence, erased by the promise of lottery millions. I took a slow sip of champagne, savoring both the expensive taste and the perfect timing. "Perfect timing, sweetheart," I said, setting down my glass with deliberate care. "What do you mean?" Her eyes brightened with anticipation, greed practically glowing in her perfectly made-up face. "I brought you a very special birthday gift. Something I think you've been waiting for." The doorbell rang again, more insistent now. Laurie glanced toward the entrance with mild irritation, clearly frustrated by the interruption of her carefully orchestrated money requests. "Really? What kind of gift?" She moved closer to me, her voice dropping to the intimate tone she'd perfected for extracting favors. "It's waiting right outside your door," I said, pointing toward the entrance where the sound had originated. "Outside? How exciting!" Her smile became genuine for the first time all evening, anticipation replacing calculation. "You shouldn't have gone to such trouble, Daddy." The endearment felt like sandpaper against my ears, but I maintained my expression of paternal affection. Around us, her guests continued their conversations about market trends and vacation properties, blissfully unaware that their hostess was about to face the reckoning of her lifetime. Laurie practically skipped toward the door, her heels clicking against the marble floor with the rhythm of someone expecting wonderful news. I followed at a measured pace, positioning myself where I could observe both her face and the reactions of her guests, when reality shattered their elegant evening. "I can't imagine what you could have arranged," she called over her shoulder, already reaching for the door handle. "You always were full of surprises." Indeed I was, though perhaps not the kind she was expecting. The lock clicked open, the door swung wide, and Laurie Steele came face to face with her past. 3 figures stood in the hallway like a tribunal of justice. Alex Rivers, immaculate in his business suit, carried a leather briefcase that promised legal documentation. Sarah King, her expression professionally neutral, held a manila folder thick with evidence. Mike Thorne's face showed the barely controlled anger of someone who'd been waiting years for this moment. Lori Steele. Alex Rivers' voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to important meetings and life-changing decisions. Her confident smile faltered, recognition flickering across her features like a candle in wind. The champagne glass in her hand began to tremble almost imperceptibly. "We need to talk," Sarah King added, her legal training evident in the measured tone that suggested this wasn't a request. Behind me, I heard conversations beginning to fade as guests sensed the shift in atmosphere. Champagne glasses paused halfway to lips. Laughter died in throats. The jazz quartet continued playing, but their music now seemed inappropriately cheerful against the tension building in the doorway. "I don't understand," Lori stammered, looking from face to face as if hoping one might prove to be someone else entirely. "Oh, but you do," Mike Thorne said, his voice carrying 24 months of accumulated fury. "You understand perfectly." I watched from across the room as my daughter's world began to crumble, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and sadness that surprised me with its complexity. This was justice, but justice tinged with the grief of a father watching his child reap consequences he'd helped orchestrate. The gift had been delivered exactly as promised. "These are legal documents regarding your fraudulent business practices," Sarah King announced, stepping across the threshold with professional precision. Her voice carried the kind of authority that transformed elegant apartments into courtrooms. Lori backed away from the door, her champagne glass finally slipping from nerveless fingers to shatter against the marble floor. The crystal fragments scattered like her carefully constructed facade, glittering under the soft party lights. "I don't know what you're talking about," she protested, but her voice lacked conviction. Recognition had already dawned in her eyes, the look of someone whose nightmares had suddenly stepped into reality. Alex Rivers opened his briefcase with mechanical precision, extracting a thick folder marked with legal tabs and official seals. Green Tech Solutions, Urban Fresh Markets, Tech Bridge Consulting. Each company name fell like a hammer blow. Years of deception laid bare in 3 simple phrases. "You stole over $1 million from innocent investors," Mike Thorne added, his restraint finally cracking to reveal the raw anger beneath. "People who trusted you with their life savings. Retirees who believed your promises about sustainable business and reliable returns." The party atmosphere disintegrated like sugar and rain. Guests pressed closer, some pulling out phones to record what was clearly becoming a public scandal. Others moved toward the exit, unwilling to be associated with whatever was unfolding. "Dad, who are these people?" Lori turned to me with desperate eyes, seeking shelter in the paternal relationship she'd abandoned decades ago. I set down my champagne glass with careful deliberation, meeting her gaze with the steady look of someone who'd finally chosen truth over hope. "They're your past, sweetheart." Finally catching up. Understanding crashed over her features like a cold wave. Her perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the pore that spread across her face as she realized the scope of what was happening. "You did this. You brought them here. Happy birthday, Lori." The words carried no malice, no celebration, just the quiet satisfaction of seeing balance restored to a tilted world. For 20 years, I'd wondered if my daughter possessed a conscience. Tonight, I had my answer. "You vindictive old man," she snarled, her mask finally slipping completely. "This isn't over. I'll sue you for harassment, for stalking, for what? Sarah King interrupted, producing another document from her folder. For providing information about criminal activity to law enforcement. For helping victims locate stolen property. The apartment buzzed with whispered conversations as guests processed what they were witnessing. Some filmed discreetly with their phones, while others gathered purses and coats, clearly planning strategic departures before the situation worsened. Alex Rivers spread financial documents across Laura's coffee table, transforming her elegant living room into a makeshift courtroom. Bank statements, fraudulent contracts, email trails, evidence of systematic theft laid out between champagne glasses and birthday decorations. $1.2 million, he announced to the room. That's the current total of verified losses from your business ventures. This doesn't include interest, damages, or the emotional distress you've caused dozens of families. We filed criminal complaints with the FBI, Sarah King added, producing official letterhead documents. Federal wire fraud, securities violations, interstate transportation of stolen property. The charges are already being processed. Mike Thorne leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than shouting. You took my daughter's college fund, money I'd saved for 15 years, working double shifts so she could have opportunities I never had. Laurie looked around the room desperately, seeking allies among people who'd been impressed by her father's lottery win just minutes earlier. But the guests who'd crowded around for introductions now maintained careful distance, social survival instincts overriding any temporary associations. This is all fabricated, she declared, but her voice cracked on the words, You can't prove anything. Actually, we can, Alex Rivers said, holding up a smartphone displaying recorded conversations. You kept detailed records of your fraudulent activities. Very thorough businesswoman, just unfortunately criminal. I watched my daughter's empire of lies collapse in real time, feeling neither joy nor sadness, but something closer to inevitability. Anne had always said that truth was like water. It found its way through any barrier, no matter how carefully constructed. The jazz quartet had stopped playing, their instruments silent in the face of unfolding drama. Party guests whispered among themselves before making quiet exits, leaving champagne glasses and canapes abandoned as they distanced themselves from association with scandal. 20 years, I said quietly, as much to myself as to the room. 20 years of wondering if you'd learned anything about consequences. Laura's response was a string of threats and accusations that revealed more about her character than any evidence folder could contain. But I was already walking toward the door, my part in this drama complete. Behind me, legal documents rustled as 3 determined investors began the process of recovering their stolen dreams. The drive back to Detroit took 6 hours through gray April weather that matched my mood. Neither celebratory nor regretful, but something closer to resolution. The radio carried news of arrests and investigations, though my daughter's case would take months to wind through federal courts. Justice moved slowly, but it moved. I'd spent that first night in a Times Square hotel, watching local news coverage of what reporters called the birthday party bust. Laurie's face appeared on screen between segments about traffic accidents and weather updates, a fallen entrepreneur whose crimes had finally caught up with her. The coverage focused on investor fraud rather than family drama, which suited me perfectly. By the time I reached Detroit's city limits, I'd made my decision about what came next. Anne's grave sat in Woodland Cemetery, under an old oak tree we'd chosen together 40 years ago, back when death seemed like an abstract concept that happened to other people. The headstone bore her name dates, and the words beloved wife and mother, though that last word carried bitter irony now. "And it's over," I said to the carved granite, placing fresh flowers beside the weather-worn inscription. "She made her choice just like she did 20 years ago." 20 years ago. You always said actions have consequences. The cemetery stretched around us in peaceful silence, filled with the kind of families who'd stuck together through poverty and illness, joy and sorrow. Real families, unlike the broken fragments Laurie and I had become. "The money," I continued, touching the cold stone where her name appeared in permanent letters. "Let's use it the way you would have. Help families like we used to be." 3 days later, I sat in the First National Bank's conference room, signing documents that established the Anne Green Memorial Fund for working families. $2 million of lottery winnings dedicated to helping Detroit families navigate medical crises and financial emergencies. The kind of problems Anne and I had faced during her illness when choosing between rent and chemotherapy had nearly destroyed us. The first recipients were a young couple whose son needed heart surgery, a grandmother raising 3 children while battling diabetes, and a veteran whose disability benefits couldn't cover both medication and housing. Families facing the same impossible choices we'd confronted 15 years ago when hope seemed as expensive as proper medical care. "Mr. Green," the bank president said as we concluded the paperwork, "this is incredibly generous. Your wife would be proud. She would have been. Anne had always believed that money was meant to flow like water, not to be hoarded, but to nourish whatever it touched. Laurie had seen wealth as something to accumulate and display, but Anne understood it as a tool for healing broken situations." The community center where Anne had volunteered during her final years became the Foundation's headquarters. The same building where she'd taught literacy classes and organized food drives now housed offices where families could apply for emergency assistance. Her photograph hung in the main hallway, smiling at visitors who came seeking help rather than handouts. "Mrs. Chen," I said to the single mother whose daughter needed insulin, "the Foundation will cover your medical expenses for the next 6 months. Focus on your family, not the bills. Mr. Rodriguez, your foreclosure has been prevented. The Foundation will assist with mortgage payments until your disability case is resolved. Mrs. Washington, your grandson's trade school tuition is paid. He can start classes next month." Each check I signed carried Anne's memory forward, transforming lottery luck into genuine hope for families who'd exhausted other options. The money that might have gone to Laws continued fraudulent schemes instead, supported honest people facing honest struggles. Evenings found me at the community center teaching basic computer skills to job seekers and helping families navigate complex assistance programs. The work felt familiar. Anne and I had been poor long enough to understand the maze of bureaucracy that accompanied financial crisis. My phone rang as I locked up the center one evening in late April, 3 weeks after the birthday party that had changed everything. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the voice belonged to Mike Thorne. "Mr. Green, I wanted to thank you. The FBI recovered 40% of what she stole from us. Not everything, but enough to start over." "I'm glad justice worked," I replied, walking toward my truck under streetlights that illuminated the neighborhood where Anne and I had built our life together. "She's going to prison," he continued. "Federal sentencing guidelines suggest 5 to 7 years. Her assets are being liquidated to pay restitution. 5 to 7 years. Enough time for her to learn lessons that 39 years of life hadn't taught her, or enough time to plan her next scheme, though federal conviction would make future fraud considerably more difficult." "Mr. Green," Mike's voice carried a note of curiosity. "Why did you do it?" Help strangers instead of family? I looked up at stars barely visible through Detroit's urban glow, thinking about loyalty and betrayal, justice and mercensamut and mercy, the complex mathematics of love and consequences. Sometimes strangers treat you better than family, I said finally. And sometimes family has to earn the title. The community sense lights cast long shadows across empty parking spaces where tomorrow would bring new families seeking help. Inside, Anne's photograph watched over application forms and hope. Money transformed from instrument of greed into tool of grace. My daughter had taught me that wealth without love was worthless. Now I was learning that love without boundaries was equally meaningless. The lottery had given me money, but justice had restored my soul. If you like this story, please like this video. Subscribe to the channel and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.